Around 1 in 3 fish products sold in British supermarkets has been found through independent DNA testing to contain something other than the species stated on the label. That is not a campaigner's estimate. It is a finding that has been replicated across multiple peer-reviewed studies focused specifically on UK retail seafood. The last time you stood in a supermarket aisle and reached for a fillet of cod, a bag of frozen prawns, or a piece of fresh salmon, you were unknowingly part of that statistic. In this video, we are naming 5 specific supermarkets: Iceland, Asda, Lidl, Aldi and Morrisons, and explaining precisely why their seafood sections deserve far more scrutiny than they are currently getting. We will show you how a legal loophole allows fish carrying a British or Scottish origin label to have never once swum in British waters. We will explain why the word fresh on a supermarket fish counter is a display term, not a provenance guarantee, and what it is actually telling you. And we will break down what the MSC sustainability tick genuinely certifies and what it quietly leaves out. If you eat seafood even occasionally, the next several minutes are directly relevant to your household, your health decisions, and the money you spend at the checkout every week. Do not leave before the shopping recap at the end. What is in those 3 points is worth the full watch on its own. Layer 1. The scale of fish. Fraud in Britain. Fish fraud is not a fringe concern at the margins of the food industry. It is systematic, it is documented at scale, and it largely goes unaddressed at the retail level where most British consumers encounter it. A study published in the scientific journal PLOS One analysed seafood samples collected across the United Kingdom and found mislabelling rates of between 25 and 36%, depending on the product category. Subsequent DNA testing exercises, carried out independently by consumer groups and food safety researchers, have produced comparable results. Cheaper species, including Pangasius, tilapia, and varieties of catfish, have been repeatedly identified in products sold under the names of premium fish, such as cod, sea bass, and even red snapper. The Food Standards Agency does conduct spot checks, but these are neither frequent enough nor comprehensive enough to function as a meaningful deterrent at the level of day-to-day retail. Most supermarkets are not legally required to carry out independent species verification on every product they stock. Instead, they rely on supplier declarations, which means, in practice, they are largely taking their supplier's word for what is inside the packaging. In a supply chain that spans dozens of countries, that is a significant gap. The result is an environment where the economics of fish fraud are extremely favorable. The risk of detection is low, the penalties when it does occur are minimal, and the financial incentive to substitute a cheaper species for a more expensive one is substantial, particularly in high-volume own-brand product ranges where margins are already under pressure. Layer 2. The fresh. Deception and the origin loophole. There are 2 labelling practices in widespread use across British supermarket seafood that most shoppers fundamentally misunderstand, and both are entirely legal under current UK food law. The first is the word fresh. In a supermarket context, fresh does not mean the fish has never been frozen. Fish that was caught at sea, frozen aboard the vessel, transported to a distribution centre, thawed and laid out behind a glass counter can legally be described and sold as fresh. There is no statutory requirement to disclose prior freezing unless the retailer chooses to include it, and the majority do not. What you are seeing at a wet fish counter is a display format, not a quality or provenance statement. The second practice concerns country of origin labelling. For seafood, the regulations are notably less stringent than for other animal products sold in the UK. Fish and shellfish can legally carry a British or Scottish origin designation based on where they were processed, not where they were caught or farmed. Prawns imported from Vietnam, India or Thailand, transported to a facility in Scotland for peeling and packing, can emerge carrying a label that reads product of Scotland. This is not a niche edge case. It is a routine commercial practice, and it has been flagged by consumer organizations and fishing industry bodies repeatedly without resulting in meaningful regulatory change. Taken together, these two practices mean the fish you are buying may have spent months frozen in an overseas cold store, been landed in a distant country, processed somewhere in the UK for a matter of hours, and arrived at your local supermarket counter wearing a label that strongly implies it was swimming in Scottish waters recently. Every word on that label may be technically accurate. None of it may be what you think it means. Layer 3. Sustainability certification and its real limits. The blue MSC logo, the Marine Stewardship Council certification, is the most recognized sustainability marker on seafood in British retail. Millions of shoppers factor it into their purchasing decisions, often paying a premium for products that carry it. Understanding what it actually certifies is essential to understanding how far that trust is warranted. The MSC certification applies to wild capture fisheries and covers the environmental sustainability of how the fish was caught at source. What it does not cover is what happens to the fish after it leaves that fishery. It does not verify species identity through the processing and distribution chain. It does not certify the environmental standards of transport or packaging. And critically, it does not apply to farmed seafood, which now accounts for over half of all fish consumed in the United Kingdom. Farmed salmon, the single most eaten fish in the UK, is regulated under entirely separate and less publicly scrutinized standards. Documented issues across the global farmed salmon industry include sea lice infestations, the use of antibiotics in some overseas operations, and stocking densities that differ considerably between production regions. When that salmon is sourced internationally, processed at a UK facility, and sold with broad origin labeling, the consumer has no reliable means of knowing which conditions produced the product they are holding. The MSC tick is not meaningless, but it is considerably narrower in scope than most shoppers believe, and on the supermarket shelf, its presence is frequently used to imply a broader standard of integrity than the certification itself actually provides. While consumers navigate mislabeled products and legally blurred origin claims, the people carrying the heaviest cost are British fishermen and the independent fishmongers who built their businesses on genuine provenance. Dayboat crews operating out of ports like Brixham in Devon, Peterhead in Aberdeenshire, and Newlyn in Cornwall are landing genuinely fresh, genuinely British fish under high operating costs, fuel, crew wages, quota compliance, sustainability standards, and struggling to access supermarket supply chains that have been optimized for large-volume, low-cost international suppliers. Supermarkets are not structured to accommodate seasonal variation or small lot supply. Their logistics favor consistency and scale over quality and local connection. When a bag of imported prawns retails for £2.50 and a British dayboat catch costs 3 times that to produce, the economics do not just disadvantage local fishermen, they make the independent fishmongers model nearly impossible to sustain. These businesses cannot absorb years of being undercut by imported product bearing misleading origin labels. Many of them have already closed. The ones that remain are holding on in towns where a loyal local customer base still values what they offer. What disappears with them is not just a retail format. It is the knowledge, the provenance, the accountability, and the direct connection between a British seabed and a British plate that no supermarket supply chain, however certified, has yet managed to replicate. What the industry isn't telling you. The 5 stores. Iceland Foods relies almost entirely on frozen imported seafood, with a heavy concentration on prawns sourced from Southeast Asia, primarily Vietnam, India, and Thailand. Despite broad sustainability language in its public communications, Iceland has consistently scored at or near the bottom of independent supermarket seafood assessments, including evaluations published by the Marine Conservation Society. Supply chain traceability, the ability to link a packaged product back to a specific fishery or farm, is significantly weaker than at most competing retailers. For a category where species, identity and origin are already difficult to verify independently, low traceability is a serious structural problem. ASDA has faced sustained criticism from environmental and consumer organizations for the opacity of its own brand seafood sourcing. Published sustainability audits have repeatedly placed ASDA in the lower tier of UK supermarkets on seafood accountability. Its own label fish products have shown limited traceable sourcing commitments compared to competitors, and it has been slower than most major rivals to remove high-risk, low-sustainability species from its ranges entirely. IDL operates on a discount business model that creates structural cost pressure throughout its supply chain. In seafood, that pressure translates into sourcing from lower-cost international suppliers, where independent verification of species identity, environmental compliance, and supply chain working conditions is harder to confirm. Lidl's published sustainability disclosure on seafood is less granular than that of the major multiples, making it functionally difficult for shoppers to interrogate the origin of what they are buying. Aldi presents a very similar picture to Lidl, and that is not coincidental. Both chains share the same fundamental commercial logic. Aldi has expanded its seafood range considerably over recent years, but the transparency infrastructure behind those products has not kept pace with the volume. For a product category where fraud is already demonstrably widespread, limited supply chain disclosure is not a minor shortcoming. It is a meaningful consumer risk. Morrisons operates its own in-store fish counters, which might suggest stronger oversight of what reaches the shelf. However, independent sustainability assessments have found inconsistencies between Morrisons' stated sourcing commitments and the actual provenance of some of its products, particularly within its own label frozen prawn range and its farmed salmon lines. The counter operation is genuine, but it is not immune to the origin labeling ambiguities covered earlier in this video, and questions around specific supplier standards in its supply base remain incompletely answered in its published disclosures. The products or categories. Most affected prawns are the single highest risk category in UK retail seafood. The vast majority of prawns sold in British supermarkets are imported from Southeast Asia or South Asia, and the gap between the origin implied by labelling and the origin of actual catch or farming is wider here than almost anywhere else. They are also one of the most consistently mislabeled shellfish categories in published DNA testing. Farmed salmon carries the widest gap between its public image, healthy, sustainable, Scottish, and the documented reality of its production, which increasingly involves overseas farms operating under standards that fall short of what British shoppers typically assume. Vague origin labelling compounds this problem significantly. Cod and haddock are among the most commercially valuable and therefore most commercially attractive species to substitute. Both have been repeatedly identified in testing as categories where cheaper white fish, particularly Pangasius, is substituted at the processing stage. This is especially prevalent in own-brand and budget-battered or breaded products. Tuna sold in tins and pouches is sourced overwhelmingly from distant water fisheries with highly complex multinational supply chains. Species substitution between skipjack, yellowfin, and albacore is common in the budget end of the market, and the catch method, claims on labels, pole and line for example, are frequently applied to blended product where not all constituent catches meet that standard. Sea bass and sea bream fillets, particularly those sold fresh or from a counter, have been found in multiple tests to contain entirely different species, often farmed tilapia from Asian aquaculture operations. The visual similarity between filleted whitefish makes species substitution at the processing and retail stage genuinely difficult to detect without DNA analysis. What you can do about it? First, use an independent fishmonger wherever possible. Not every town still has one. but where they exist, they represent the most reliable source of genuinely traceable British fish. Ask where the fish came from, when it was landed, and whether it was previously frozen. A fishmonger who cannot answer those questions directly is worth leaving. One who can is worth the price difference. Second, look for the FAO catch area code on the label. This appears as a reference such as Atlantic Northeast FAO 27 inches and is a more reliable indicator of genuine geographic origin than any headline description or marketing claim. If there is no FAO code visible on a seafood product, the origin statement is effectively unverifiable. Third, treat product of Scotland or product of UK on prawns and processed shellfish with specific skepticism. Ask yourself whether the label distinguishes between where the product was caught or farmed and where it was processed. If only the processing location is British, the product's true origin may be something entirely different. Fourth, ask the counter directly whether the fish was previously frozen. You are legally entitled to that information, and a counter that cannot give it to you is telling you something important about its own supply chain. Genuinely day-fresh fish will have a landing or catch date available. Ask for it. Fifth, download the MCS Good Fish Guide before your next shop. The Marine Conservation Society publishes a free, frequently updated guide rating fish species and their sources by sustainability risk. It covers the most common species found in British supermarkets and takes under a minute to check. Having it on your phone makes you a meaningfully better informed shopper than most of the people standing in that aisle alongside you. 3 things to carry out of this video and into your next seafood purchase. 1. Fresh on a supermarket fish counter is a display format. It tells you nothing about whether the fish was previously frozen. Always ask, and if no one can tell you, factor that in. 2. British and Scottish origin labels on prawns and processed fish frequently refer to packaging location, not catch location. Always look for the FAO catch area code before trusting an origin claim. 3. Iceland, Asda, Lidl, Aldi and Morrison's have the weakest published transparency records on seafood sourcing of any major UK retailers. That does not mean every product they sell is fraudulent, but it does mean you are operating with significantly less information than you should be when you buy fish there. UK checkout. Truth exists because the gap between what the industry knows and what the shopper is told is not accidental. It is managed. On seafood, that management has been so effective for so long that most British consumers have no idea the gap even exists, and the retailers benefiting from that ignorance have every reason to keep it that way. You now know enough to shop differently, and you know enough to ask questions that the major supermarkets would rather you didn't think to ask. Here's what we want to hear from you. Have you ever bought fish in a UK supermarket that you suspected wasn't what the label said? And if so, what did you do about it? Tell us in the comments. And if this investigation was useful, our next video pulling apart how British supermarkets are using shrinkflation to quietly raise effective prices while denying any price increases at all is already waiting for you. Same channel, same standard of evidence.